Hey guys, Eric Goldman and Terri Schwartz here from IGN's entertainment team. There is a ton of new TV shows hitting us right now, one after the other, but we are here to talk about the one that I think is our mutual new favorite, Westworld, coming to HBO October 2nd, so pretty soon. We've seen the first 4 though, and we're going to talk no spoilers, just an overview of why we love this show and why we think you will love this show.
This really is our excuse to also talk to each other, but we do. I have my handy dandy iPad in front of me, so if you have questions and comments, we'll get into a little bit about what we're so excited about, but then we do want to sort of have a conversation with you guys. We love doing Facebook Lives. We're both still a little bit new to it too, so forgive us if there are any technical difficulties or hiccups.
It'll be perfect, Terri.
It'll be perfect.
Wrong.
It'll be flawless. Flawless like Westworld. Good transition
yes.
back. This was a pilot I was really excited about, or series, not necessarily pilot, from Jonah Nolan and Lisa Joy. Jonathan Nolan worked on Person of Interest, which we both really love. Lisa Joy is his wife and has executive produced a lot of other fantastic
Pushing Daisies she worked on. She worked on Burn Notice.
And we heard some things about there were delays and production stuff, so I got nervous and right from the opening of the premiere, I was like, oh, this is the show that I want it to be. And having seen the first 4, it's so well done. I'm so excited about it. No other show this fall season makes me feel that way.
I agree completely. I was completely excited about this from the second I heard them announce it. I'm a big fan of the movie, the Michael Crichton movie from 1973 that it's
which
based on.
Which I haven't seen yet, but I will.
She's about to see. And then, the talent involved, knowing that Jonathan Nolan, Lisa Joy were the ones writing it, J.J. Abrams is also executive producing it, an HBO series, it all just sounded perfect. So I've been excited from the start. Yes, you couldn't help but hear the stories, of course, about when they shut down production for a while and, is this a troubled show? But then, we watched, watching the first episode and then the ones we've seen since, it's so good right out of the gate. My wife and I watched the pilot together, and she didn't kind of go in as excited as I was, and she was completely hooked. She was like, oh, this is my new favorite show.
One of the things that impresses me the most is it just looks visually so impressive. They filmed it up north in California, correct? So it's like, you can see there are real sweeping vistas and stuff, but the way they built the town and the way they incorporate sort of the sci-fi, it reminds me a little bit of the Hunger Games, where there's the control room side of things, and that's sort of where Anthony Hopkins' character is, because he runs this park, but then also within the world of Westworld, it just really blends well together, and that melding of sci-fi and Western mentality is really, really interesting.
Yeah. We should talk a little bit, if you don't know the basic concept, but I think you probably do at this point, but just in case, it is Michael Crichton's favorite topic, theme parks going awry, and this futuristic theme parks, we should say, or using crazy things. So this is about a theme park that is a Wild West recreation, but it's populated by androids or robots, whatever you want to call them. Artificial beings are there to entertain the guests. And what does that mean? It means if you want to get in a shootout, they're there for it. If you want to go to a prostitute, there's a robot for that. They're there for everything.
A lot of robots for that, actually.
Yeah. They're there for everything because you're there to kind of role play, and they're there to interact with and just sort of be there as the foil, the person that you are dealing with there in whatever role you're taking on. Because do you want to be a guy there to help people, or do you want to be a villain? And unlike the movie, though, because the movie was pretty much the robots go crazy and start killing people, this is much more getting into the psyche of the robots and the idea of artificial intelligence and what their perception of their life, or whatever you want to call it, is. And what you were saying, it's gorgeous looking. It looks like the most beautiful Western ever shot, while it's also a sci-fi show at the same time.
Yeah, it feels really, especially the androids within Westworld feel really true and authentic to that period. You don't feel like they're play acting as actors. I think that all of them ground the series in really interesting ways. And Evan Rachel Wood is sort of the main character who you see Westworld through, especially in the first episode. You find out a lot more about her early on, but God, she's just phenomenal. She's so, so good. And this is a show that just, the riches keep coming in terms of the cast, but she has just impressed me the most in what I've seen, even with Anthony Hopkins and Ed Harris in your cast.
It's an amazing cast. Jeffrey Wright, it's just so many great actors in it. But Evan Rachel Wood is definitely in the pilot. You're kind of in to Westworld because we experience, a day in the life of Dolores, her character, which is a ever-repeating day. She doesn't know that, though. She's not programmed to know that she's a robot. She's not programmed to know that she's reliving events over and over again, because she'll wake up and go about her day, and it'll go exactly the same until she interacts with a guest, and that could send her off in a different direction. But she's so good. There's these scenes in the pilot where she's talking to sort of the people in the control room, Hopkins and other people, Jeffrey Wright, and someone tells her to stop using the accent, because she's using this sort of, prairie girl accent. She stops that, but then she is very earnest in Westworld. She plays this sort of plucky girl. It's a very multifaceted role that I'm really interested to see where it goes.
And I think we've seen a lot of different actors sort of playing the android side of things, and sometimes that takes you out of it, right, as they power down or boot back up. But there are just some really, like you said, especially her interactions with Jeffrey Wright, and there's one that you can see in the trailer where the fly sort of like walks over her eye, and it's very chilling, but I think they do a really good job of making you care about these characters, especially as their lives do reset. And I found myself sort of trying to be like, well, what's the deviation in this day? Like, how long has this been going on? What are they supposed to do?
Right.
How much are they improvising? What's going on there? And also, there is sort of a larger mystery and larger narrative that's unfolding. I sort of felt going in like, you have Anthony Hopkins, an esteemed, just such a talented actor, a huge name for HBO on an HBO series. How much is he going to be a part of it? Did he come in for like a week and shoot all the scenes or something like that? He's in so much of the show, and he kills it. He chews that screen time in a way that only Anthony Hopkins can, but he's like a really important part of the show. So I think if you're going in and you see his name, especially Ed Harris as well, is another really interesting, other mysterious side of the show, but they're both in so much of it and really like don't overpower it as well. I can't speak more highly of that.
Yeah, it's an ensemble for sure, but it's an ensemble where everyone's definitely getting their due. And so Hopkins plays, one of the founders and kind of the head of Westworld, with Jeffrey Wright sort of his right-hand man. And but they're very important characters, and Hopkins is in a lot of it. And he's very interesting because the whole idea, again, it's dealing with this artificial life that Hopkins' character helped invent and design. But how much do the people working in Westworld perceive them, the real people, perceive them as anything more than just, objects, just, things they invented? And there's a lot of interesting sort of notes and nuances. Again, I'm not going to get into spoilers and say specifics, but how the different people working in Westworld react to their own creations, including Hopkins' character. And it's not always as cut and dry as you think. And they might feel one way about things, and then when a different situation happens, you kind of see that, oh, they're not exactly who I thought they were, which I really like.
So guys, I finally figured out how to access comments in this. I was holding it the wrong way. If you saw me messing around with my iPad, that's what I was trying to do. Someone says hi to Naomi. She's not here, but we'll pass that along to her. So if you do have any questions, again, we don't want to get into spoilers here. We really just want to explain why we're so excited about the show, and we want to, answer any non-spoilery questions you might have. But the one thing I do want to bring up, Eric, is, HBO has Game of Thrones, which we also both love. We have Dragons on the Wall, our weekly Game of Thrones show. We can prove we love it too there. But that's like the big drama on HBO right now. Other than that, their big shows are comedies, Veep, Silicon Valley, the new batch of comedies they have coming out. Do you think that Westworld will fill sort of that Game of Thrones void for people? I
do. And it's not, we talked about this a few months ago, and it can't be exactly right. It's not, nothing is Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is Game of Thrones. And even while Westworld is a wildly ambitious and big show, the scope of Game of Thrones is kind of hard to equal. Just the fact that they shoot it in different countries, in multiple countries, and it takes place in so many places. So it's not going to be a one-to-one, like, oh, this is exactly like Game of Thrones. But I do think as Game of Thrones is going into its twilight and going into its final couple years, this is a show that could definitely pick up the slack as being the sort of event series on HBO, the big, impressive production design series. I mean, I'm a huge fan of The Leftovers. Not only is it going into its third and final season, it was never going to be like, it's just too esoteric and sad, frankly, to be this kind of show. I do think Westworld will fill that sort of gap for people maybe as Game of Thrones goes away in a couple years, assuming it's a big hit, and we hope it is. of being, that show that you get really invested in, really invested in the characters, and is very nuanced. It's not just delivering spectacle. That's what's important about it.
So I'm going to answer a couple questions all at once. First of all, Bill Garcia asks, what's Westworld? So we broke that down a little bit at the beginning of the show, but you might have been coming to us now. It's basically HBO's adaptation of the Michael Crichton written film, Westworld, but sort of spins the mythology and isn't as much about, that movie was about the androids sort of becoming sentient and attacking visitors in the park. This is much more about the balance between the androids, who it's sort of unclear, like they're made. This is answering another question from Ang Omar Ziad, who's asking, so they're half human, half mechanical? No, they're like created, and you can see the creation process and how they're sort of built from like some sort of like white plasticky material, but they definitely are programmed to act like they're human. So this show is showing the balance between what's going on with these creations in the park, and something a little off is happening with them that they're sort of trying to explore, and then the human side, the sort of the caretakers of the park, are also trying to investigate it, when again it's clear there might be a little bit more than we're understanding.
Yeah, we should mention, in case you don't know Michael Crichton's name offhand, he was the author of Jurassic Park, so I often make that joke about the fact that this is a guy who was very obsessed with the idea of state-of-the-art crazy theme parks where things go wrong. And the other thing, we should also mention that, with J.J. Abrams producing, that he was actually talking to Crichton about it before Crichton even died years ago, about doing a new version. And also the fact that things it evokes for me, it definitely evokes Battlestar Galactica, the recent one. And it was funny because Battlestar, like Westworld, started as a 70s project that was much more sort of us versus them, and then the reboot was much more like, let's look at the robot, the other, from their point of view. So if someone doesn't know anything about it, it's looking at that idea of a robot and artificial intelligence, and how real might it be? How much should we be considering this as a actual being? And we should mention Person of Interest also dealt with themes of artificial intelligence and self-awareness. So if you watch that show and like that sort of idea as it grew and grew, and the machine became more of a character.
Yeah, the empathetic relationship between the humans and the machines is a big part of Person of Interest that I see here as well.
Yeah, but this is taking it to the next level because it has like the machine never had a physical robot body.
Right.
This is about, they've created an entire town of these robots with this AI inside them, and how much are they becoming self-aware of their environment?
So I want to apologize again for continually looking at the iPad. I'm looking at your comments and questions, and
she's not ignoring you.
I'm not.
She's ignoring me.
Someone's like, oh, he's boring her so much. I was like, no, I'm very invested in what you're saying. We're getting some questions about Westworld, when Westworld premieres. It's going to be October 2nd on HBO, 10-episode season, like Game of Thrones. Someone else was asking, hold on, I just lost it. Basically, about, I know. Lucas was asking, can we talk about the scenery and environment? And we talked about that a little bit as well. It's beautiful, beautiful, gorgeous, like sweeping shots of the West, shot north of Los Angeles in California, somewhere up there.
And of course, they've got the central classic Western town with the saloon, the brothel. Thandie Newton's character is sort of the madam of the robot brothel.
Has a much bigger role in this, and a much more interesting role in this than I was expecting. I loved that by the time I got to episode 4.
Yeah, she really comes in. I mean, you see her in the first episode, but because it's a huge ensemble, some people you see in the first episode, but you really only get to know them in other episodes. And then some of the characters we meet later on, who are going to have, and we haven't even seen some of the actors we know are appearing. So
yes, like Tessa Thompson, who's going to be in Thor Ragnarok. We have not seen her yet.
Yeah.
But I did want to say, in terms of the town, one of the things that kept surprising me was sort of the scope of Westworld, the park. Like, it could be very easy. When you were sort of introduced to it, we see these sweeping vistas, these great like panoramic shots, but then we're mostly set in the town. But as the show goes on, and one of the characters is sort of going on a journey exploring different parts of Westworld, it's so big.
Yeah.
And like it's really impressive. And when you sort of Anthony Hopkins' character is sort of the architect of Westworld, and as you find out more about his vision, and there's a point where you see a part of the park that was probably around like 20 or 30 years ago.
Right.
And you really get a sense, like, yes, there's a little bit, moments like that felt a little Disney World. Is there like, constantly tearing down parts of the park, rebuilding new ones, but it is so big. It's a place that I would want to go visit, even though all these terrible things are happening.
Right.
And we also should talk a little bit about the music. It has the same composer from Game of Thrones, which Eric memorized how to pronounce his name.
I don't know. Ramin Djawadi, but I'm probably getting it wrong. He did Game of Thrones. He also did Person of Interest. So he worked with Abrams and Nolan on that. Beautiful score. It's a great classic Western theme to it that I was humming after I binged the first 4 episodes. So if you love the work he's done on those 2 other shows, and you should, I think you'll be very happy. And then we should also mention beyond the Western world, of course, is the control room aspect, which looks, of course, very different, and that's a great sort of dichotomy of it. I think that, in some respects, it has almost like an Apple Store aesthetic, the sort of white sterile thing, which also reminds you of a 70s sci-fi movie, which I'm guessing probably isn't coincidental. It's like almost a nod to the 70s origins, sci-fi origins of Westworld. But yeah, it's you talked about the behind the scenes of it all, and they even mentioned, I believe, when I was at ATX Festival in May, and they did a Q&A where they're talking about it. There's an aspect to Westworld that's almost like a Truman Show-like or meta, because it's the writer's room almost. It's like these people behind the scenes, and I've talked to some of the cast about this too, how it's almost a funny, analogy for them of like the people that are controlling your life, your performance. And they make all the calls, and they tell you what you're going to do. And so there's an interesting thing there about these people that are watching you all the time and saying, this is what you're going to do.
Yeah, people are sort of asking like how the world works within it. So basically the 2 settings we primarily see are the areas within Westworld, a world that looks like our own, but set in the Wild West. And there's a lot of scenes set there. And then we also see this control room, like the main company, corporate side of things, where they build the androids for the park. That's where Anthony Hopkins' character primarily is. They can go sort of down and see where they hold some like the old androids that have been taken out of the park. But we don't necessarily see like our world now. It's very much set in these 2 areas. And someone was asking like, how do the androids not get out? And it's a little unclear, like there are
what
ways...
What are the edge of Westworld?
Yeah, we don't really get a sense of what the edge of Westworld is, but there are like certain elevators that the people who work in the control center can go up into the park. And I think what the most important thing is, and that the show is starting to deal with, is the androids are very much programmed to be completely unaware that there's anything outside of the life and the storyline that they've been told. And we're starting to see, like in the first episode, sort of what the hook is that these characters are getting hints that there might be something else. Maybe they've lived dozens or hundreds or thousands of other versions of this day, that that line is getting blurred, that reset button isn't quite working. So I think that's the really interesting thing. Whether they do eventually get out of Westworld is something I think the show is going to explore.
Yeah, and I think you also get the idea that why doesn't one of the robots get on a horse and keep riding until they're out? I think you get the idea that they've been programmed that they probably wouldn't. They just like, I never want to leave here. I love here. That they all have these limitations put on them that stop them from doing certain things because that's what their programmers, want.
And there's actually even a point where they sort of acknowledge that within the show, where one character who's having, like, again, this line being blurred is like, why don't we leave? Like, why we keep saying someday we'll go do this, why don't we do it today? And the other character who's not having that line being blurred is saying, well, someday, I'm not ready yet. Like, they are definitely programmed to prevent them from leaving, which is a fun system to then just collapse.
And we'll see. We're gonna wrap up here in a minute, but I'll just say, as a big fan of Person of Interest, which I highly recommend if you haven't seen it, I am excited to see how the show will evolve. I think because it will evolve. I think that's one thing. Person of Interest changed a lot over the years. So if you're worried, like, oh well, how can they sustain this? Won't it just be the robots finally turn on them and that's it? I think the show will become very different.
And I did want to quickly say, like, I think comparisons to Game of Thrones are very apt. I was the one who brought that up to you a little bit earlier in this stream. But I think the difference with Game of Thrones versus Westworld is Game of Thrones started a little slow. It took a while for people to find it. And I think people are going to come to Westworld a lot bigger from the outset. And the problem with that is you could have a great premiere and then lose steam and people could fall off instead of there being this build like we've seen with Game of Thrones, where now it's the biggest show ever on HBO. HBO. But I do think we've only seen 4 episodes, but those 4 episodes very much maintain my interest. I think they maintain the quality of the show, and the pacing is great. Like, I couldn't wait. I still can't wait to watch the 5th one, and now we need to wait even longer. But yeah, I think when this premieres on October 2nd, people, it's going to be what we're hyping, what we're excited about, and what people who are interested in the show are hoping it will be, which is the best selling point I can give.
Right. So those are our thoughts. We're obviously very hyped up about this show. We hope you agree. We think a lot of you will, though. Like Terri just said, October 2nd, though, you can see for yourself the first episode of Westworld, and there'll be plenty more to come. We'll be covering the hell out of this show because we love it. So for more on Westworld and all things HBO, keep it here at IGN. Thanks for watching, guys.